I walked into the hotel, where the cold white lights shone down on the glossy floor, making every step I took stand out like a trail someone left on purpose. My phone was still open in my hand, Ethan's message sitting right there on the screen. I'm meeting a client. I didn't close it. No need. A server walked up, bowed politely, and asked if I needed help. I said Ethan's name. He pointed inward, toward the restaurant stretching along the glass wall. Table 10, ma'am. I looked over. Ethan was there, leaning in toward a younger woman. I stood still for a few seconds, my eyes as cold as if I were reading an error report popping up on my work screen. No emotion, no shock, just acknowledgement. The woman brushed her hand lightly on my husband's arm, as if they'd shared private conversations for years. Ethan smiled back. The same smile he used when he wanted to impress someone. A slight squint, a small tilt of the head, the kind of man who likes to look refined on the surface. I didn't hurry over. No need. Only one clear thought cut through my mind, sharp as a paper slice. To understand this scene, we have to go back 1 month. A month earlier, I was still me, Ava, a UX researcher. I spent my days analyzing user behavior, catching tiny inconsistencies no one else ever notices. Look at something long enough, and it becomes familiar. Once it's familiar, you start seeing everything clearer than people expect. And Ethan, my husband, a sales director, smooth talker, great at networking, confident to the point he didn't notice when he started slipping on his own words. That night, he said, "I've got an internal meeting at 7. He sounded completely natural, but the next morning, when I ran into one of his co-workers outside a convenience store, the guy said one short line. "Sales doesn't have evening meetings this week." I just nodded. No reaction. I simply wrote one line in my phone. Mismatch number 1. The meeting never existed. A few days later, Ethan left his company expense card on the kitchen counter. When I lifted it to clean up, the receipt tucked behind it made me pause for exactly 1 second. Hotel lounge, rooftop bar, upscale restaurants, all at night. Not a single charge tied to actual work. Nothing that matched the client dinners he always talked about. I put the card back exactly where it was and went on making my drink, then added another line, mismatch number 2, expenses unrelated to work. I didn't ask Ethan, didn't trigger suspicion. I just observed, exactly the way I do in every project at work. From there, the small details started slipping through, not because I searched for them, but because he covered them so poorly. But that part comes later. Tonight, those pieces only served to make the scene in front of me feel even more inevitable. I stood a few yards from table 10, far enough for no one to notice me, close enough to catch every expression on their faces. Ethan kept smiling. The girl kept tilting her shoulder toward him, and I stayed still. No shaking, no hurt. Watching them felt like watching footage I'd already seen, every piece landing exactly where it should. In that moment, I realized something most people aren't cold enough to admit. Ethan was living in 2 layers, and each layer thought I couldn't see it. I lowered my eyes to my phone. His message was still there. I'm meeting a client. I locked the screen and took one more step into the restaurant. Not to confront, not to cause a scene, not to drop evidence. Tonight wasn't meant for chaos. Tonight was for me to confirm how far Ethan would keep lying when he thought he was in control of the story. I took a quiet breath, not long, not shaky, and thought, I'm not here to catch him. I'm here to see how far he'll lie. After that night at the hotel, I didn't say a single word to Ethan about what I saw. I didn't ask who he was with, didn't ask where he'd been, didn't ask about the gaps he tried to fill with smooth sentences. Ethan kept repeating the same familiar lines every day. I've got a meeting. I'm seeing a client. I have a contract to handle. I'll be home late. I just nodded. Nothing more. Each time he said something, I opened my phone and added one clean, short line, almost like tagging it. Meeting claimed upper 5, client meeting upper 8, late return upper 3. Not to accuse him, but to see the pattern he was building. People repeat themselves easily when they lie, and Ethan repeated so much I didn't even have to try remembering anything. The next odd sign showed up naturally without me looking for it. Tuesday night, Ethan slipped on a workout jacket and said, "I'm going to the gym. Might be late." I looked at him for 1 second, then turned back to my laptop screen. "Okay," I said, like the sentence wasn't worth analyzing. A little later, I went down to the building's gym to drop something off. His personal trainer was packing up. I asked, just as small talk, "Has he been training regularly?" The trainer laughed. "He's canceled for 3 weeks straight." I nodded, thanked him, and walked straight to the elevator. No irritation, no surprise. I just added a line, mismatch number 3, gym canceled 3 weeks. Ethan always thought small things like that go unnoticed, but small things are exactly what I'm best at seeing. A few days later, Ethan told me about a client meeting. He told it smoothly, which bar, what he ordered, who was there, what they discussed. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, I asked again, "What did you eat last night?" Ethan gave me a different version, different bar name, different story. On the third day, I asked once more, and he offered a third version, contradicting most of the details. I didn't need to act suspicious. I just nodded and kept wrapping the sandwich. In my line of work, scrambled versions like that are the clearest behavioral signal. Honest people forget. But 3 versions of the same story. That's someone patching a script so fast he can't remember the last line he used. I added, mismatch number 4, story variations. The 5th sign came on a quiet evening. Ethan walked in with a fancy fountain pen. I knew he didn't use expensive pens, so when I asked, he said, "A coworker gave it to me." I didn't challenge it. A few days later, I watched a story from a girl, a friend of a friend, the one who once showed up with Ethan at a company party he said he barely talked to. The story was blurry, filmed under warm lights, only a few seconds long, but enough for me to see she was holding that exact pen with the engraved initials that couldn't be a coincidence. I didn't screenshot it, didn't replay it. I just watched and knew. That was enough. Mismatch number 5, pen. I didn't need to look for more. Ethan was supplying plenty on his own. When I pulled all the data together, the meeting that never existed, the off-purpose expenses, 3 weeks of skipped gym sessions, 3 conflicting versions of one story, the coworker's gift pin, they all pointed to the same conclusion. But what made me pause wasn't any of those signs. It was a photo folder that showed up in a mutual friends group. Someone sent me a folder of pictures, shots of Ethan with a woman. They thought I should know, not realizing I'd known for a long time. I opened the folder. If it had only been Ethan and one woman, maybe I would have felt weightless. But no, there were 3 women, different from each other, all appearing in the same time span. Ethan's messages to them, same phrases, same structure, same emoji patterns, so identical, I only had to read half a line to know exactly how the rest went. Copy, paste, send. I didn't feel hurt. I just saw the pattern, like watching a data sequence repeat until it exposes its own anomaly. At that point, I knew Ethan wasn't just cheating. He was running his own system, a loop he thought he controlled. But every system has leaks, and all I had to do was sit and observe. I started setting the board for myself. A week before the day Ethan planned to meet a client at the hotel, I had already booked table 5. A spot private enough for me to sit still, close enough to see everything, nice enough that no one would question it. I printed every document, the dating photos, the overlapping story timestamps, the copy-paste messages, the matching schedules, the cross-checked data, all arranged into a thin, clean stack, organized by date and time like a complete behavioral analysis. I drafted the divorce papers, not long. No reasons written out, no emotional language. One sheet, 2 signatures, that was enough. I put everything in my bag, not heavy, not in the way. I just waited. The moment came on an ordinary afternoon, no different from any other day. I was working when my phone lit up. A message from Ethan. I'm meeting a client. A calm sentence. Short. Confident I'd believe it. I stared at the text for a few seconds. No particular feeling. Just a signal that the script had reached the point I'd been waiting for. I locked the screen and said to myself, it's time for you to fall into the script you wrote. I stood up, grabbed my bag, fixed my shirt. No mirror check, no makeup touch-up, no shaking. I walked out the door with the posture of someone who was no longer being led, but someone directing the entire ending. And I knew. Tonight, Ethan would realize he'd never controlled this story. Not once. I walked into the hotel at the exact time he'd arranged to meet the client. My steps were slow and steady, not rushed, not tense. The air in the wide lobby cast a cold golden glow across the mirror-bright floor. Each step reflected back at me, sharp and clear, as if the whole space was observing me more than I was observing it. The server recognized me from my reservation the week before. He gave a small bow and asked if I needed guidance. I simply said, Ethan's table. He gestured to the right, toward the restaurant stretching under a row of soft gold ceiling lights. Table 10, ma'am. I nodded, but I didn't walk in that direction. I glanced for a beat, then turned left, exactly the way I'd planned. Table 5. I sat down like it was my usual spot, not needing to look around or check anything. I'd already done that, many times. The server brought the menu. I didn't open it. I just said, water first. My voice was so normal, no one would have guessed my bag was carrying the thing that would end Ethan's entire story tonight. I set the bag down, adjusted the strap. I didn't look at table 10, no need. A moment later, I felt his stare, heavy, urgent, confused, before I even turned my head. Ethan saw me first. I heard a napkin drop onto the table, a small sound, but enough for me to picture his face draining of color. I lifted my glass, not drinking, just swirling the water a little. At table 10, his fiancée tilted her head toward him, her expression turning clearly uneasy. She definitely wasn't prepared for me to show up here, in this spot, with this expression. Ethan looked at me, then at her, then back at me again, like he was trying to stitch together two parts of his world he never thought would collide. I didn't look at him. Not for a second. I let him drown in his own panic. No rescue, no reaction, no acknowledgement. Just waiting for the right moment. And just as expected, he couldn't handle the silence. Ethan got up from table 10, leaving his fiancée behind with a face full of questions. He walked toward me, trying to look calm, but his shoulders were tense and his steps heavier than usual. Ava, he said, his voice smaller than I remembered. I kept my eyes on the table, my finger tapping lightly on the glass, as if I were deciding when to say my next line. He stood there a few more seconds, then asked, tense and trying to control his voice, "Have you been following me?" I lifted my eyes at the exact moment he was waiting for. A direct look, not cold, not angry, simply acknowledging a factual point. "You're asking the wrong person." My voice was quiet enough that he had to lean in a little to catch it. But once the meaning hit him, I saw his chest rise a bit, like someone who'd missed a step on the stairs. He opened his mouth, probably to explain something, but I didn't let a single word reach me. I looked back at my glass of water, as if this conversation was just a small interruption. The air around table 5 grew heavier. Not because I was applying pressure, but because Ethan realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. Right as he tried to find the words, I placed my hand lightly on my bag, a small movement, but enough to make Ethan fall silent. He knew what was inside, not because I told him, but because my calmness made it clear I didn't come here empty-handed. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what he was doing. I didn't ask who the girl was. I didn't need answers from someone who'd given 3 different versions of the same story. I just looked at him, breathed lightly, and tapped the edge of my bag with my finger. Ready? No raised voice, no tension. A question as simple as clicking open a file. Ethan swallowed hard. Behind him, I saw the fiancée stand up, confused, glancing toward my table. She didn't know whether to walk over or step back. Maybe she was starting to understand this wasn't a moment where she could keep playing the gentle role. I didn't look at her long. I didn't need to. When Ethan stepped back half a pace, I unzipped my bag. My hand rested on the stack of documents inside. I was ready to move to the final scene. I opened my bag, pulled out the stack of documents, and set them in front of me. Not forcefully, not with any dramatic sound, just a light placement, but enough to make Ethan freeze, like I'd laid down a verdict he was never prepared to face. I looked at him, my voice calm enough that anyone nearby might think I was handing business papers to a client. I know everything, Ethan. He opened his mouth, probably ready to say something like, "You misunderstood," or "I can explain." But I turned the stack slightly, not toward him, but toward the woman he'd been calling his fiancée. She had just returned to the table, and her eyes landed immediately on the page with her name on it. I didn't look at Ethan. I looked at her and said, "Take a look." Her fingers trembled the moment they touched the edge of the papers. She flipped the first page, the one where I placed 3 names side by side, hers, mine, and the third woman Ethan had been seeing during the same stretch of time. She stopped. Even her breath paused midair. I let her turn the next page on her own. Photos of Ethan dating each woman, each time in a different spot. A cafe, a hotel lounge, a riverside restaurant. But his posture was identical to the point of being ridiculous. His hand resting behind each woman's chair, his head tilted slightly toward them, his eyes trying to create the illusion of just you. A sales technique, not love. She swallowed hard, her hands shaking even more as she flipped to the next section. The messages. I knew that part would hit the hardest, because even for me, the first time I read them, the repetition was too perfect to chalk up to coincidence. Every message Ethan sent to each woman was identical, word for word. "You make me feel calm. I've never met anyone like you. Don't worry, I always choose you." Copy, paste, send to all 3. The girl lifted a hand to cover her mouth, her eyes wide. Ethan turned to me, voice urgent. "Ava, it's not what you think. I can explain." I placed one more page on the table, the scheduling sheet. 3 different colors, 3 different women, but the timelines matched perfectly. The days he said internal meeting, gym, client dinner. Finally, I pulled out the last page, the fountain pen. A blurry story photo where the girl was holding the exact pen Ethan told me was a gift from a coworker. The engraved initials were clear under the restaurant lights. No need to add anything. The girl looked at Ethan, her voice shaking. None of the softness she'd been playing earlier. "How long have you been doing this?" Ethan opened his mouth, but the words fell apart like shattered glass. Nothing made it past his throat. I didn't look at him for long. I looked at her and said, very quietly, "If you want out of this, sign first." I placed the divorce papers on the table, not where she was supposed to sign, but she understood. She looked at the paper, then at her name beside 2 other women's names, then back at Ethan, pale, lips twitching like he wanted to speak but couldn't form a sentence. And then she picked up the pen. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. She signed in the blank space, the way someone signs to walk away from a role they suddenly realize they were only a supporting character in. The sound of the pen touching paper was soft, but to Ethan, it was the sound of his entire script collapsing. A few nearby tables turned to look. No one said a word, but the quiet was heavy enough to tell Ethan everything was far beyond his control now. He swallowed hard. Ava? I can explain. Just listen for a second. I stood up, not fast, not jerking the chair, not making a single unnecessary sound. I looked at him one last time that night. My eyes held no hate, no anger, no satisfaction. Just the look of someone watching a broken system fail exactly the way it was predicted to. You didn't need me to push you. You fell on your own a long time ago. The sentence landed between us like a clean, final period. I picked up my bag and walked away. Behind me, the girl stood as well, leaving the table without giving Ethan a single glance. I didn't need to turn around to know what he was doing. I could feel the sudden quiet at table 10, the kind of silence that only happens when the last person in a story realizes he's the only one left in it. And I knew that, as my steps carried me farther, Ethan was sitting there, falling right into the ending he wrote for himself, losing me, losing her, losing the confidence he thought was strength, and losing the perfect mask he believed no one could see through. I didn't win. He didn't lose because of me. He lost because of himself. And because tonight, for the first time, he had to sit alone in the story he thought he controlled. I didn't go anywhere after that night. No suitcase, no changing locks, no running from pain the way people assume a breakup forces you to. I went home, the home I'd lived in, worked in, and taken care of myself in for years. Everything was still exactly where it belonged. The living room lights on their timer, the books on the shelf in the order I liked, the sofa still showing the fold where I sat each night to read reports. Nothing was broken. Nothing needed cleaning up. I hadn't lost anything. Only one person had fallen out of my life, and he'd pushed himself outside that boundary long ago. Tonight just made the truth visible. I set my bag on the table, unzipped my jacket, and opened the window. The night air drifted in, cool, clean, carrying none of the weight from the scene at the restaurant. I made a cup of tea and took it into my workspace. My laptop was still open exactly where I'd left it. The UX report I'd been drafting was right there on the line I'd stopped at. I reread a few paragraphs, adjusted 2 sentences, typed out an idea that came to me while I was at the hotel. I realized I was working normally, not slower, not distracted, not even slightly off balance, not because I'm strong, but because Ethan no longer has anything that could make me weak. My phone lit up, a message from Ethan. I looked at it, but didn't open it. I placed the screen face down on the table, not out of anger, but because whatever he was about to say no longer had anything to do with the direction my life was heading. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, a mutual friend called. Her voice was tight, like she had to say something she shouldn't, but couldn't hold it in. Ava, the other 2 women Ethan was seeing, they know everything now. I just said a quiet, yeah. No surprise, no asking, how did they find out? I let the pieces arrange themselves in my head, the same way every analysis file I've ever made falls into place. She kept talking. They found each other, and after that, they went to Ethan's company. I stayed silent for a few seconds. My friend exhaled hard. There's a lot of noise. HR called an emergency meeting. One of the clients asked for a different account lead. Ethan's boss is furious his personal mess is affecting the project. I looked in the mirror and adjusted my collar. My face was calm, like she was talking about someone else entirely. Ethan's biggest fear was always his private life hurting his image at work, And in the end, he caused exactly that, without anyone pushing, without anyone sabotaging him. My friend lowered her voice. Are you okay? I grabbed my bag and answered, I was okay long before this. And that was the truth. At work, I went straight into the morning meeting like any other day. No one looked at me with pity. No one knew anything, and I didn't need them to. I worked until noon, then said yes to a lunch invitation from a group of friends I turned down many times because Ethan used to act irritated whenever I spent time with others. They laughed, told ridiculous stories, asked what I wanted to eat. I chose something light, no need to hide my smile, and I realized, for so long, I'd made myself smaller to fit someone who was never big enough to hold the person I was becoming. I don't need to shrink anymore. At the end of the day, I bought a bouquet of white tulips on my way home, not as some post-breakup self-care gesture people like to talk about, but because I wanted them. And I realized how long it had been since I let myself like something simply because I liked it. I put the flowers in a vase, adjusted a few stems so they stood straight. The room brightened a bit, soft but noticeable. That night, I opened my phone. Ethan's messages were all still there. Apologies, explanations, promises, begging. I read them all, then deleted them. No reply. I didn't need to play the generous, forgiving one. I didn't need to play the cold, heartless one either. I just needed to follow the logic of truth. What doesn't belong to my life shouldn't stay in it. Ethan isn't a problem I need to solve, and I'm no longer part of the equation he once thought he controlled. At night, I sat by the window with my cup of tea on the wooden ledge. I looked down at the street, light stretching out, traffic thinning, and the city starting to slow. I felt wide, not empty, wide, like this home, this life, was never crowded by the wrong person to begin with. It was just that now, I wasn't letting anyone sit in a place that wasn't meant for them. I thought about Ethan for a moment, not with heartbreak, but with clarity. Some people pay the price for being betrayed. Some pay the price for doing the betraying. And Ethan chose the second one. I didn't need to watch him fall apart. I didn't need to hear him beg. I didn't need to see him regret anything. I just needed to see myself living right, clean, steady, without shrinking from the fear of losing someone. Before going to bed, I stood in front of the mirror. My face was calm. My mind was clear. I whispered, not to motivate myself, but like a final footnote in the corner of a page. I didn't take anything from you. I just returned you to where you belong. And that night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply, not because I walked away from someone, but because I stayed with myself. One thing I learned from all of this is, when someone chooses betrayal, they usually lose far more than they expect, and the truth always finds its way back to where it should be. That's the end of the story. Thanks for listening all the way through. What do you think about the price each person pays for their choices? If you have your own thoughts or experiences, feel free to share them. I always appreciate hearing them. And don't forget to support the channel with a subscribe and a like. Your support truly gives me the motivation to keep telling these stories for you.